I'll be damned, I pipped him to the post. Be it a decommissioned missile complex or a zombie-plagued suburb, Valve titles have always carried with them a wonderful sense of place. The environments they include are sheer works of art. Even the now dated-looking Half-Life still bears an epic ambience, its stark concrete caverns maintaining a siren allure, tempting you to explore. I find industrial ruin and decay to be, for lack of a better word, sexy, and the sprawling aperture facility of Portal 2, especially its abandoned and forgotten depths, provide a delirium of delight. In the original game, we were treated to ruined backrooms and rusted mechanical chambers that gave a glorious weight to the place. A feeling that it had been there for an age, that there was so much more to it than what you were seeing, and that you were simply scratching the surface. The environments of the sequel go to great lengths to allow further exploration of this enigmatic location. Wandering its subterranean catacombs is like looking at the age rings on a tree, with every era being represented by the technology and architecture of the period, all of it capped with a view of the modern facility's foundations. Its enormous shock-absorbing springs, lightly illuminated in the foggy gloom, prove a much more awe-inspiring sight than any highly detailed surface vista. Gameplay-wise, it's more of the same, which is certainly not a bad thing. The mechanics of the original were perfect, a simple concept applied to mind-bending puzzles. But with Portal 2 being a longer title, the constant test chambers do become the weaker aspect of the game, especially when you're forced to return to them after those fantastic explorative sections. The audio that accompanies them, however, does dull the pain. GLaDOS, resurrected and hellbent on revenge, continues to issue those serrated put-downs, but the best non-potato-fueled lines are given to the awesomely named Cave Johnson, voiced by J.K. Simmons. Portal's dialogue raised a smile, but Portal 2 genuinely made me laugh myself silly on many occasions. The inclusion of Stephen Merchant in the cast initially had me worried. I'm not really a fan of his brand of humour, and the thought of having to endure his prattling over the course of a game was a prospect as appealing as listening to Rebecca Black on a continuous loop through a set of headphones constructed from angry bees. Valve's casting directors clearly had more faith than I, and as it turns out, again chose the perfect person for the role. Merchant brings spheroid thicket Wheatley to life in such a way that I can't imagine anyone else ever doing as good a job. Through its exquisite visuals and audio, the game peels away at the layers of Portal's universe, drip-feeding you details about Aperture, its history, its demented purpose, and the intrigue surrounding both. What the game doesn't provide would have been considered just a minor complaint back in 1998 when Half-Life was first released. A minor niggle that only unrelenting nitpickers would bother mentioning. It has, however, become such an inevitability with Valve titles that it's an issue not only worth mentioning, but worth highlighting angrily and campaigning against. Closure. Specifically, the lack thereof. Valve has never made a game with an ending, and it's really starting to grate. Half-Life ends with a train ride into eternity. Half-Life 2, G-Man hits pause. Episode 1, Freeman is knocked out. Episode 2, he's knocked out again. Okay, as much as I hate Master Chief, at least his power suit has a helmet. And in Portal, you're left incapacitated in the car park. Yes, Valve are excellent set builders, godlike gameplay engineers, and authors of marvelous dialogue. But all the evidence we've thus far been provided indicates that their narrative writers are root vegetables. Awesome set piece after awesome set piece makes for an excellent roller coaster ride. But if there's no resolution at the end of it, the journey there feels rather pointless. Especially if the developer operates at roughly the same speed as your average glacier, and civilizations rise and fall between release dates. On top of that, Valve has started committing the cardinal sin of editing previous works so that new stories can be shoehorned into the franchise. At the end of Portal, Chell was jettisoned out of the facility, but for the sequel she somehow ended up back inside. How this happened is never mentioned ever over the course of the game. I actually had to go to Wikipedia for an explanation. Apparently a patch was released that tweaked the ending of the original Portal so that Chell was shown being dragged away by a robot, which leaves those of us who either completed the game before said patch released or simply never installed it utterly bemused at the massive plot hole. Piss-poor storytelling is just one of the issues I have with Portal 2. The second is that 50% of the game can only be played cooperatively. Usually I wouldn't mind that, but when substantial amounts of the Portal mythos, that being the very hook that made me brace out and buy the title in the first place, can only be accessed with a playmate that I do not have, a great deal of off-pissing ensues. If multiplayer is to be included with a single-player campaign, the former should always play second fiddle to the latter, and it should certainly never include tempting story elements. I suppose a solution to the problem would be to go out and get some friends with whom to play the game, but that would be surrendering to the irony of Portal 2. It's a game in which you rail against authority and instruction, but in order to conquer co-op, you've got to do as you're damn well told, no matter how much you hate it or how effectively you think you can use 2 control pads at once. Yes, I did try. In summary, Portal 2 is a delightful experience, with wonderful twists and turns, but in the end, even if you do indulge in the multiplayer, you somehow feel cheated. Perhaps it's the lack of information regarding the protagonist, perhaps it's Valve's trademark lack of closure. Personally, I think it's that the game can be waltzed through in a day and leave you with no real desire to return. For what you're asked to pay for the title, that's an awfully tiny cake.